Good afternoon, everybody. It's KB5MIQ Big Boy. We're going to talk a little bit today about power supplies. Something we all got to have to run these rigs, but I think a lot of people, I don't know, don't see as many questions about that. It's just a necessary thing we got to have. We're going to talk mainly about all transistor rigs. The older tube radios, those tubes required different voltages, and most of them had a specific matching power supply. So I'm not going to talk about those. We're going to talk about new radios, all transistor rigs up from say 80s all the way up to now. First off, let's talk a little bit about safety. You're dealing with DC voltages, all right? And depending on the amperage of your power supply or your battery, DC voltages can burn you. They generate a lot of heat. I worked for several years in an electrical repair outfit at the depot between my time as a machinist, and we had a 500 amp Christie variable power supply because all our stuff was 28 volts DC. I have seen guys burn 6-gauge wire up, shorting stuff out on that thing. So, got to be careful with that. Now, they talk about batteries. Your old school lead acid batteries, acid. Acid burns, getting your eyes will burn your skin, and it'll tear your clothes up. So, got to be careful with that. And those lead acid batteries will explode. I've seen them explode. Jeff had one explode years ago in his younger days. So, it's something you have to be careful with. All right. Let's talk a little bit about this. Is what I'm going to tell you about power supplies is just my viewpoint. I'm not telling you have to do what I say. But my rule of thumb on a power supply, I use the same rule of thumb on amperage and the size I want as I did in the military for a while when I was over a generator section. We was taught whatever your load is, get a generator 20% bigger. Never load a generator over 80% of the load. And I try to use that similar with ham radio. Now, you've got multitudes of stuff available to power your rigs on now. You've got batteries. These Bino batteries are really, really good. They're kind of expensive, but if you're wanting to do portable ops, POTA, stuff like that, I'd highly recommend them. Cody's got one, Jeff's got one. They really enjoy them. You got a lot of hours transmitting time in them, especially if you turn your power output down. They both run theirs at 100 watts. You got lots of hours to transmit out of them. Most time, I think when they're running field op, they turn down to about 50. Lead acid batteries, they're still functional. They still work. We had an incident years ago with a guy that checked in with us, a local ham, that was running a 25 watt Radio Shack 10-meter mobile. And his audio would fall out after a while, and Jeff come up and said, turn your power battery charger on. He knew he was running on battery because they don't have the same, I don't know what the right word is used, but they will go down faster under a load than like these Binos will. Personally, I like the old transformer style battery power supplies. Let me try to pan my camera around here a little bit. I'm running an Astron RS50A into a 10-mile power strip. You don't have to run a power strip. I did it because it kind of neatened up my connections. If you're running a power supply and you got multiple radios, I've got the Yaesu 897D. I've got the auxiliary meter with it. I've got a Kenwood 2-meter mobile. And I'm running a dreaded CB also. I just have it in there for nostalgia. When you run in a power supply, you end up having to put all that positive negative on same terminals. And if you ever take anything out, you kind of not a problem, but you end up having to take everything loose to get to it. Running a power strip, you could just take the individuals out. I kind of like it like that. Now, do you want a switching power supply or do you want a transformer type power supply? They've made a lot of improvements in switching power supplies. As a matter of fact, if I have to replace this one, That's probably what I may try this next go around. When I bought this Astron, I had just started hearing about switching power supplies, and this was back in '06 time frame, '07. And talked to the local ham, and he said, I don't know much about them, but I do know some guys that's tried them that's having some noise issues with them. So I just stuck, he's kind of old school like I am. He said, I recommend transformer type. Okay, this is the only time you'll ever hear me not recommend you buy a certain piece of equipment. And I'm going to tell you this, and I put a review on it on eham.net, so I don't mind telling you this. I like a lot of MFJ equipment. I've got several pieces of MFJ stuff. I got one of their antennas up. I've got a dummy load, a VHF watt meter, several pieces of MFJ stuff I've used over the years. But my first transformer power supply after my old one died, I bought this one in '06, was the MFJ 50 amp transformer power supply. Man, it was a good looking power supply. Had your gauges on it, meters on the front, had your hookups on the front. It was variable power supply. Even had a cigarette lighter adapter on it. Really good, well-made power supply, except for one thing: the dang cooling fan. And they did not have that cooling fan wired for temperature. They had that cooling fan wired the minute it saw load, it come on. Because I actually experimented with it. I put my Kenwood 2-meter rig on low power, which if I remember right, is 5 watts. Key the mic could come on. Just as loud as it was on 100 watts on this 897. It was distracting. The fan was so loud it was distracting. So I had to come up with a solution there. I was either build me a box, put this power supply under my bench, or I even considered putting it outside the window in a box, which negated the use of the cool features it had on it with the meter and stuff like that. If it's so noisy, you got to put it where you can't see it. That's not helping you. So, old boy I knew was looking for one to power a camper with, so I sold it and I bought this Astron, and I've been well pleased with it. I just finally, after 06, 21, 14, 15 years, had to replace the on-off switch in it. Astron's been kind of the standard on transformer power supplies for a long time, and you can't beat them. The first one I had was a used RS-20, and it was old when I bought it, and I used it for 10 years before it just died. So that's one reason I like the Astron transformer power supply. Jeff and Cody both use switching power supplies. Jeff still got an Astron RS-20 he bought new that still runs, but Jeff's running an MFJ 30 amp switching power supply. Cody's running an Elenco. And their pictures of all this will be on the tail end of this. The first 2 pics will be Cody's power supply and his Bino battery setup. The next 2 pics will be Tim's charger and marine battery setup. And then the last 4 pics will be Jeff's Astron and MFJ and his battery setup. They like switching power supplies. I think there's been a lot of improvement made in them since they've come around, and I'm not going to say anything bad about them. The only thing I remember about switching power supplies back when I got back into the hobby at about '06, the ICOM 746 Pro was offered because a friend of mine bought one, and they was giving away an ICOM matching switching power supply with it. For some reason, everybody had a lot of trouble with that radio. He never really complained he had any trouble with it or anything, but I just stuck with transformer power supplies. Now, you got to know the amperage of your main radio. You're not going to transmit on multiple radios at the same time off the same power supply in most shacks, I don't believe. So it's not going to hurt to have a 30 amp, 20, 22, 23 amp radio hooked up and a 14, 15 amp radio hooked up and letting them all monitor for receive. Because my practice is I'll turn them on, and then as I'm trying to transmit, I just turn all of them off, maybe except the 2-meter, I'll leave it on monitoring. But you need to look at the amp draw of your main rig. I know Jeff and I talked about this last night. The radios of the 80s and 90s were all 16 amp radios. I'd have to dig my manual out, but I know my Yaesu's a 20 or 22 amp draw radio, and I think his 718s are like a 24 amp draw. I'm not sure, but I know they're over 16. So that's reading he had to buy a bigger power supply. Both Cody and Jeff are running 30 amp switching power supplies. Cody's a Linko, and Jeff's is a MFJ. Now, when you buy a power supply, you need to look at what's continuous and surge. Both of their power supplies are 30 amp continuous with like a 37 amp surge. This RS50 Astron is a 37 amp continuous with a 50 amp surge, which means you can run 30 on this one, 37 amps, 24/7. It shouldn't hurt it. But the surge is not designed to run the surge continuous. So you need to buy a power supply accordingly to what size rigs you're going to be running on it. And portability, I'll say this much, the switching power supplies are a third the size of this Astron and probably a third of the weight. That thing weighs 50 pounds. I've been down in my back and I had to pick it up from over there and bring it out here on this bench to put the switch in and put it back. So it's a pretty good load. Do you need a power strip, distribution strip? It's totally up to you. I didn't use one for years, and I was taking this mess off one day and I just had a wad of wires on. I said, man, I got to clean that up. So I bought one. MFJ sells them. They've got some pretty good ratings on them. I bought a 10 of them off Amazon just because I kind of like that brand a little better for that particular item. But HRO has got power supplies. MTC's got power supplies. They've had a real good sale on, it's not a MFJ, cannot remember the name of it, but they've got them on their website. If you're interested in power supply and looking at different ratings and different reviews on them, go to eham.net and look under product reviews. They got a whole listing under power supplies. You can read about anything. Like I said, I don't like to knock one brand's particular item, but I can't in good conscience recommend that MFJ 50 amp transformer type to anybody. Jeff said his switching power supply has worked great. Cody's Alenko said his has worked great. So, like old buddy Jeff told him years ago when he bought that Astron, he bought it right before I got into the hobby and said, well, did y'all buy anything to Hamcom today? And Jeff said, well, I bought a power supply. Well, you can't have fun with a power supply. Well, maybe not, but it's there. You got to have it. That's just part of the hobby. I may be rambling here a little bit. I'm trying to get my head straight on what I was going to say. Now, like I said, on the old tube rigs, Jeff went from an HW101 Heath kit to a Kenwood 180S, and he said he run it on battery for a good while before he bought that power supply, because like all of us in our youth, was all on a budget, and crap, we all still run our stations like we're on a budget. But anyway, pick you a good power supply. Be sure to get one big enough for what you want to do. Look at what works best for you, transformer type or switching. I think switching power supplies may be the way to go now. They take up a lot less room on the bench and they're not near as heavy. Power distribution strip, totally up to you. If you're only running one or two radios, just put them on the lugs on the power supply and don't worry about it. If you want to be able to add 3 or 4 different things, they're a good option to look at. Just remember safety. You're dealing with DC voltages. If you're using lead acid batteries, remember the acid, remember the explosive capabilities of them, and they're heavy. Jeff's running that Bino battery like Cody, and he's also got a gate opener battery he's used. You get it Tractor Supply. I don't think it's going to have the life of the Bino battery, but they still work. And I've read where some guys are building their own power supplies out of computer power supplies. Hey, that's just experimentation and part of the hobby. Not knocking that. Not knocking that a bit. Appreciate everybody who subscribed to the channel. We've hit 564. Y'all remember Main Trading Company in Paris, Texas, for all your ham radio stuff. They're rebuilding their website and been redoing their store. I think that we got some big things coming from them. This weekend, Irving Ham Fest. I'm going to have to tag a picture of it behind MTC. And then Farmersville has their monthly sidewalk sale. At the end of this video, I'm going to tag all these pictures these guys set up, and I'll tag those in, and the thumbnail of me and Ham Radio Cat be the end of it. KB5MIQ is my call sign. My email's posted on my QRZ page. Feel free to email me or comment any questions. I appreciate everybody who subscribed to the channel. It's KB5MIQ Big Boy 73.